The spoon clinked against the rim of my mug as I stirred the cocoa. It was supposed to be a comforting sound, rich with cinnamon and warmth, but instead it reminded me how shaky my hand was. The living room behind me buzzed with chatter. My family always gathered loud on Christmas Eve, but my chest already felt tight, because I knew what was coming. My uncle would find a way to turn the night into a stage, and I'd be his easiest target. I should probably explain. My name's Aaron Price, 32, and according to half of my relatives, I've been wasting my life on small jobs. That's the phrase they use, like it's some tidy label that explains away a decade of effort. I run a modest IT repair. Business, laptops, home networks, sometimes a server setup for local offices. Nothing flashy, no Wall Street suits, no big Silicon Valley paycheck. But it pays my bills, keeps a roof over my head, and even lets me help out Mom since Dad passed. The problem is my Uncle Richard. To him, work only counts if it comes with a corner office or a golf membership. He's the type who talks about making connections, but never mentions the people he steps on. He made good money in commercial real estate, bought a bigger house every 5 years, and somewhere along the way decided his success gave him permission to mock everyone else, and every Christmas I become his favorite prop. The set-up eye set my mug down and turned toward the tree. My cousin Mark was untangling a string of lights that somehow ended up in the toy bin, and Aunt Linda was already offering slices of her pecan pie as if dinner hadn't even started yet. It smelled like cinnamon rolls and pine needles, the kind of scent that makes strangers think of comfort. To me, it was more complicated. My Uncle Richard arrived late, as usual, in a navy overcoat that probably cost more than my car. He carried himself like the room belonged to him, like every laugh or pause in the air waited for his approval. When he hugged Mom, I saw her jaw tighten just slightly, the same way mine did. She never said much, but I knew she didn't like how he treated me. "Aaron," he said, his voice booming as if we were on a stage. "Still fixing people's printers for a living?" There it was. The first jab, casual, disguised as conversation. A few cousins chuckled awkwardly. I forced a small smile. "Mostly networking these days. Security systems, too. Small businesses keep me busy." Small businesses," Richard said, like he was tasting something sour. "I guess somebody has to do the grunt work." It's funny, if a stranger said that, I might have shrugged it off. But when it's family, in front of people you grew up with, the sting is different. It crawls under your skin and stays there. The dinner table. By the time we sat down to dinner, the house was glowing with Christmas lights and the smell of roasted turkey filled the room. I took a seat halfway down the table, not too close to Richard, but not far enough to escape. He started telling a story about his latest real estate deal, how he flipped some office building downtown for a ridiculous profit. Everyone nodded, some impressed, some just pretending to be. Then, as if on cue, he turned the spotlight on me. "So, Aaron," he said, carving into his turkey like he was leading a board meeting. "Still dreaming of the big leagues? Or are you satisfied keeping Housewives' Wi-Fi running?" A few laughs, mostly nervous ones. Even Mark, his son, looked down at his plate. I chewed slowly, buying myself time. "It's steady work, pays better than you think." Richard grinned, shaking his head. Sure. But don't you ever want more? I mean, come on, you're 32. You should be climbing by now." There was the familiar burn in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something heavier, like being shoved into a corner you can't step out of. Everyone's eyes flicked toward me, waiting to see if I'd defend myself or take the hit. I chose silence. Because here's the thing. I've learned that arguing with Richard only makes it worse. He feeds on it. And deep down, maybe I was tired of defending myself to people who didn't want to understand. Small comforts. After dinner, while the others moved toward the tree for presents, I found myself in the kitchen, rinsing plates. It wasn't my job, but it gave me something to do with my hands. Mom came in quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to listen to him," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know. But knowing and feeling aren't the same thing. Through the doorway, I could still hear Richard's booming laugh, retelling some story about his early days in real estate, how he outsmarted the competition. He was building himself up, brick by brick, like always. Then I heard another voice, quieter, uncertain. "Dad," Mark said, Could we not talk about Aaron's job like that?" The room went silent for a beat. I froze, plate in hand, and strained to hear. Richard chuckled. "Come on, son. It's all in good fun." "Doesn't sound like fun," Mark replied. My chest tightened. For the first time, someone had spoken, up for me. The turning point later that night, when the presents were opened and the fire had burned low, I stepped outside to get some air. The snow crunched under my boots, and the cold bit my face in a way that made me feel awake again. That's when Mark followed me out. He stood there for a second, shoving his hands in his pockets like he was working up the courage. "Hey, Aaron," he said finally. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Sure." He looked down, then back up. Do you think you might have work for me?" The question hit me harder than any of Richard's jabs. Because here was his son, the golden boy, the one who went to college on his dad's dime, asking me for help. I didn't answer right away. The snowflakes drifted down between us, catching in the glow of the porch light. And for the first time, all evening I felt something shift inside me, because suddenly, I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The porch light flickered against the snow, and Mark shifted his weight like he wasn't sure if he should have said anything. His breath hung in the air, slow and uneven, while mine caught in my chest. I kept my hands tucked deep in my jacket pockets, not because of the cold, but because I didn't want him to see they were trembling. "You're serious?" I asked finally. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He nodded. "Yeah, I've been looking around, but nothing's clicking. I thought maybe, since you've got your own business, you'd know where I could fit in." It was surreal. For years, I'd been painted as the one who never aimed high enough, the cousin lagging behind, the family disappointment who made just enough. And now Richard's son, his pride, his living proof of success, was standing here asking me for a shot. I didn't answer right away. The pause stretched between us, filled only by the distant hum of laughter spilling out from the living room. Mark's story. "I thought you were working with your dad," I said at last. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "I was. For about 6 months. But it wasn't for me." He let out a breath. "Look, Dad's great at what he does, but he's also, well, you know how he is. He doesn't exactly leave space for mistakes. And honestly, real estate just isn't something I care about." That surprised me. Richard always spoke of Mark like he was being groomed for the throne, like his son would carry on the family empire without question. "So what do you want?" I asked. Mark shrugged. "Something that feels real. Something I can actually build. On my own. I've always liked tech stuff, you know. Computers, troubleshooting, figuring things out. I thought maybe I could learn from you." The sincerity in his tone threw me off. I'd expected him to come out here embarrassed, half joking, maybe fishing for sympathy. But he wasn't joking. His eyes held that same restless mix of pride and shame I carried when I was his age. My hesitation, I'll admit. I felt a petty flicker of satisfaction. After years of sitting through Richard's digs, here was the one thing he couldn't script, his son turning to me. Part of me wanted to march back inside and announce it to the whole family. To let Richard hear his golden boy admit that maybe grunt work was more useful than flipping office buildings. But another part of me hesitated. Taking Mark on wouldn't just be about business. It would mean dealing with Richard in a way I'd never dared before. And what if Mark wasn't serious? What if he only lasted 2 weeks before running back to his dad? You know it's not glamorous, I said, my breath fogging in the air. It's troubleshooting. It's climbing under desks. It's dealing with clients who can't remember their own passwords. It's not the kind of thing you brag about at Christmas dinner. Mark laughed softly. Honestly, that sounds better than real estate dinners where Dad lectures me about margins. He grew quiet, kicking at the snow with his boot. I don't want to end up resenting him, but I already kind of do. I studied him. He wasn't bluffing. The awkward return. Inside. Before I could say more, the back door opened. Uncle Richard stepped out, his booming voice carrying into the night. There you two are. What's this? An outdoor strategy meeting? Mark stiffened, his shoulders tensing like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I felt the urge to smirk. Just catching some air, I said. Richard looked between us, his eyes narrowing slightly. Well, don't freeze out here. Come in and join the rest of us. Mark, your mother's asking for you. Yes, Dad, Mark muttered, brushing past him back inside. Richard lingered for a moment, squinting at me. I hope you're not filling his head with your modest ambitions. I met his gaze steadily. We were just talking. He smiled thinly. Good, because Mark has a future. I don't want him wasting it. Then he turned and went back inside, leaving the cold air sharper than before. Laying awake. That night, I lay in the guest room on Mom's old pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling. The muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses had faded hours ago, replaced by the soft creaks of a settling house. But my mind wouldn't settle. Mark's words replayed over and over. I thought maybe I could learn from you. I couldn't decide what to feel. Pride? Because someone actually saw value in what I did? Fear? Because involving Mark would mean walking straight into the storm of Richard's disapproval? Or maybe just relief, because after years of being written off, someone in that family finally saw me as more than a punchline. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under. But even in sleep, I dreamed of wires and screens, of Mark sitting beside me at a cluttered workbench, asking questions that mattered. The morning after Christmas morning always started with coffee and stockings at Mom's. I helped her brew the first pot, both of us moving quietly so we wouldn't wake the rest of the house. You were out on the porch a long time last night, she said softly, sliding sugar into her mug. I hesitated, then told her. Not everything, just that Mark had asked about working with me. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? Yeah. He sounded serious. She smiled, faint but genuine. Good for you, Aaron. You've been carrying yourself with dignity all these years. Maybe he sees that. I wasn't sure about dignity. Half the time it felt like survival. But hearing her say it loosened something in my chest. When the rest of the family finally shuffled in, pajamas, messy hair and all, the usual chaos of gift opening began. Richard played master of ceremonies, handing out packages with dramatic flair, commenting on every gift like he was narrating a show. But every time my eyes met Mark's across the room, I saw something different. An unspoken question hanging there between us. Richard's shadow, of course. Richard couldn't help himself. At one point, when Mark opened a new leather briefcase Richard had bought him, he boomed, "For your real work, son." Something sturdy, something professional, not for crawling under desks. Everyone laughed politely. I forced a chuckle too, though my hands tightened on the coffee mug. Mark's eyes flicked toward me, then down at the briefcase. He didn't smile. That moment told me more than any words he'd said the night before. A quiet decision. When it was finally time to pack up and head out, I found Mark by the door, pulling on his jacket. "Think about what you said," I told him quietly. "If you're serious, come by the shop next week. I'll show you what it's really like." His face lit up, relieved, grateful. "Thanks, Aaron. I will." I nodded, trying to keep my voice even. "Don't thank me yet. It's work, not a shortcut." "I know." He smiled faintly. "That's why I want it." And for the first time in years, walking out of that house didn't feel like retreat. It felt like the start of something else. The Monday after Christmas, my shop felt colder than usual. Not just because the old heater in the corner struggled against the January chill, but because I was nervous. It had been years since I'd worked with anyone else in a meaningful way. I'd hired a few temps in the past, college kids looking for extra cash, but they never lasted. Either the pay wasn't enough for them, or they didn't have the patience for dealing with frustrated customers. Now, Mark was supposed to show up, my cousin, Richard's son. The irony wasn't lost on me. I swept the floor twice just to burn off nervous energy, cleared the counter, even organized the bin of tangled Ethernet cables I always swore I'd get to someday. At 9:15, the bell over the door jingled. Mark's first step Mark stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He wasn't dressed like his dad, no crisp suit or expensive watch, just jeans, a hoodie, and that awkward mix of determination and uncertainty I remembered from being his age. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. I tried to keep my tone casual, though my chest tightened with the weight of what this meant. He looked around the shop, the shelves stacked with routers, the workbench cluttered with open laptops, the faint smell of solder that seemed permanently embedded in the air. "Smaller than I expected," he admitted. I laughed. "That's because you've been raised on your dad's version of business. To him, size equals success. Around here, we care more about whether things actually work." Mark smiled, and for the first time, I saw relief in his expression. The key. First lesson, I started him off simple. Diagnostics. An older desktop sat on the counter, brought in by a local accountant who swore it just stopped booting. Rule 1, I told him, is never trust the phrase, "just stopped." Computers don't do anything just. There's always a reason. He crouched beside me as I showed him how to check the power supply, then walked him through running a quick memory test. He asked questions, good ones, not just filler. I could tell he wanted to understand, not just follow instructions. By noon, the machine was running again. Mark looked almost proud, like he'd fixed it himself. "That wasn't so bad," he said. I shrugged. "Some days are like this, quick fixes. Other days you're fighting gremlins for hours. You'll get both." A surprise visit. 2:00, the bell rang again. I glanced up, expecting a customer. Instead, Uncle Richard walked in. My stomach dropped. He looked around the shop with thinly veiled disdain, like he'd stepped into a garage sale. His gaze landed on Mark, who was wiping dust off his hands. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, his voice filling the small space like it was a courtroom. Mark stiffened but didn't answer. I stepped forward. He wanted to see what I do, so I'm showing him. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You mean you're dragging him into this hobby of yours?" "It's not a hobby," I said evenly. "It's a business. Keeps me afloat." Richard chuckled. "Barely." He turned to Mark. "Come on, son. You don't need to waste your time here." But Mark didn't move. He looked at his father, then back at me. "I'm staying," he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Richard's face tightened. A flicker of something, anger, maybe disbelief, crossing his features. "You'll regret this," he muttered finally, before storming out. The bell jangled violently as the door slammed shut behind him. After the storm, Mark exhaled shakily. "Well, that went better than I thought." I shook my head, half amused. "That was better?" He laughed nervously. "You don't know him like I do. Trust me, If that's all he said, it's a win. I studied him for a moment. He was pale, but his jaw was set. He wasn't backing down. "You sure you want this?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I need something that's mine, not his." And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just teaching Mark about networks or software. I was giving him a chance to step out of Richard's shadow. Long days over the next 2 weeks, Mark showed up every morning. He learned quickly. Sometimes he got frustrated, like the day we spent 5 hours chasing a short in a custom gaming rig, but he never quit. He started taking calls, learning how to explain things to customers in plain language. He even made a couple of sales, recommending upgrades to people who thought they just needed repairs. One evening, as we locked up, he said, "You know, this feels good. Like I actually helped somebody." I nodded. "That's the job. People come in stressed, angry, desperate. You send them out calmer than when they came in. That's worth something." Richard's pushback. But of course, Richard didn't let it go. One night, Mark showed me a string of texts his dad had sent. "This is beneath you. You're wasting your education. I didn't pay for 4 years of college for you to crawl under desks with your cousin." I felt a flash of guilt reading them. Was I really pulling Mark into something he'd regret? But then I saw Mark's reply. "It's my choice. I'm learning things I actually care about." He showed me the screen like he needed confirmation. "You did the right thing," I said. He nodded, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. Standing up to his father wasn't easy. Quiet victories won. Saturday, we landed a big job, setting up a network for a small law office downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid work. Routers, cabling, security protocols. The kind of job that paid well enough to keep the lights on for a couple of months. Mark worked beside me the whole weekend, running cables through ceiling tiles, labeling ports, double-checking settings. When we finally powered everything up and saw every light blinking green, he grinned like a kid. "That was us," he said. "We made that happen." And for the first time, I didn't just feel like his cousin. I felt like a mentor. The dinner confrontation. Of course, Richard found another opportunity. 2 weeks later, we were all back at Mom's for Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the usual spread. Richard showed up late again, wearing another tailored suit like he'd just come from some deal. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, Mark, how long before you get tired of playing with wires?" The table went quiet. My fork hovered over my plate. Mark didn't look at him. He just said, "Longer than I lasted pretending to care about real estate." The silence, this time wasn't awkward. It was electric. Aunt Linda nearly dropped her glass. Mom pressed her lips together, hiding a smile. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in years at these gatherings. Pride. Richard's face hardened in that moment, like Mark's words had been a crack across marble. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by his own son, and certainly not at the family dinner table. The scrape of cutlery and the faint hum of the fridge filled the silence until Aunt Linda cleared her throat and changed the subject, asking Mom about her garden. But the damage was done. I saw it in Richard's jaw, the way he chewed slower, quieter, as if the food had turned bitter. Mark, though, he didn't flinch. He cut another piece of chicken, took his time, and kept talking with the cousins about a movie they'd seen. The more normal he acted, the more obvious it became. He'd drawn a line, and somehow I was sitting right on the edge of it too. The car ride after dinner, when everyone was bundling into coats and saying goodbyes, Mark offered me a ride back to my place. It was late, snow falling thick across the windshield, the wipers squeaking rhythmically. "You okay?" I asked him after a while. He shrugged, eyes on the road. "Yeah, that needed to be said." I studied him. "You know he's not going to just drop it." Mark sighed. "I know, but I'm tired of trying to live up to his version of success." I don't want a mansion if it means hating myself in it. I let that sit between us. I remembered being 24, fumbling through odd jobs, wondering if I'd ever prove myself to anyone. It struck me that maybe Mark was braver than I'd been at that age. Growing pains, the weeks that followed were a blur of steady work. January was always busy. Tax, preparers, accountants, and small offices dusting off their systems for the new year. Mark kept showing up. Some mornings he looked exhausted, like his dad had spent the night lecturing him. Other days he was energized, eager to prove himself. He made mistakes, like plugging a cable into the wrong switch and knocking out Wi-Fi for an entire waiting room, but he owned up to them, and he learned. What surprised me most wasn't just his work ethic, but how good he was with people. Customers who came in grumpy left calmer after talking with him. He had a way of explaining things without making anyone feel stupid, something I'd taken years to figure out. One afternoon, after he'd finished helping a local bakery set up a point-of-sale system, the owner pressed a box of pastries into his hands. "You saved us," she said. "Come by any time." Mark beamed the whole drive back. Richard's ultimatum. Then came the phone call. It was late, close to 10, and we were both still in the shop finishing paperwork. Mark's phone buzzed, and when he saw the name, his face drained. "Dad," he muttered. He stepped outside to take it, but the walls were thin. I couldn't help overhearing. Richard's voice thundered even through the glass. "Enough is enough, Mark. This little phase has gone on long enough. You're coming back with me, and we'll get you into something real." Mark's reply was shaky but firm. "I told you I don't want real estate." "You don't know what you want," Richard snapped. "But you sure as hell aren't going to waste your potential playing sidekick in a strip mall computer shop." Silence. I held my breath, waiting. Finally, Mark said, "It's not a waste. I feel like I'm actually building something. And I'd rather fail doing this than succeed being you." My chest tightened. He'd said it, the one truth Richard couldn't stand to hear. The conversation ended with a slammed call. Mark came back in, pale but steady. "Well," he said, forcing a smile. That went about how I expected. Family fallout word traveled fast. By the next family gathering, a cousin's birthday, Richard barely acknowledged me. He talked over Mark, boasted louder than usual, and made a point of emphasizing every deal he'd closed. But something had shifted. The younger cousins, the ones in college or just starting jobs, drifted toward Mark and me. They asked what it was like running a small business, how we found clients, what kind of problems we solved. For once, Richard wasn't the center of gravity. And he hated it. A big break in February, we landed a contract that changed everything. A mid-sized dental clinic needed a full systems overhaul, new servers, secure backups, everything. It was the kind of job I usually lost to bigger firms. But this time, we got it. Mark had been the one to clinch it. He'd met the clinic manager while fixing her laptop at the shop, explained what we could offer, and followed up with a professionalism that impressed even me. For 3 straight weekends, we worked. 12-hour days, crawling through wiring closets, testing failover systems, setting up encrypted storage. Mark was right there, sleeves rolled up, dust in his hair, troubleshooting alongside me. When the final system came online without a hitch, the manager shook both our hands. "You guys are lifesavers," she said. Driving home that night, Mark leaned back in the seat, exhausted but grinning. "Feels good, doesn't it, knowing we actually did that?" I nodded. "Yeah, feels real." The boiling point. The next Sunday dinner was unavoidable, Mom insisted. "It's still family," she said, and I couldn't argue with her. Richard was there, of course. He eyed Mark across the table like a general glaring at a deserter. Halfway through the meal, he finally broke. "So, Mark," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "How much are you raking in now? Enough to buy yourself a mansion? Or are you still getting paid in cupcakes and thank yous?" Mark set his fork down slowly. His hand didn't shake. I'm making enough. More than enough. And I actually like what I do. Richard barked a laugh. Like it? That's not success. Son, that's a hobby. Success is wealth. Success is power. You think people respect you because you can plug in a router? Mark's eyes flicked to me, then back at his father. I think people respect me because I help them, because I listen, because I fix things. That's more than I can say for flipping buildings just to pad your bank account. The table froze. Aunt Linda whispered his name like a warning, but Mark didn't back down, and in that moment, I knew the storm had finally broken. The room was tight with silence after Mark's words. Forks hovered mid-air, eyes darted between father and son, and I swear even the ticking clock on Mum's wall seemed louder than usual. Richard sat back, face flushed, jaw tight enough to crack. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly. Not in front of an audience, and absolutely not by his own son. Careful, Mark, he said finally, his voice low, almost dangerous. You don't know what you're throwing away. Mark didn't flinch. I do, he said quietly. I'm throwing away being miserable. No one dared add a word. For once, Richard's authority, the booming voice, the expensive suit, the carefully crafted image, didn't fill the room. It collapsed under the weight of something he couldn't control, honesty. The aftermath dinner limped on after that, conversation scattered, laughter forced. I kept my head down, chewing mechanically, but inside I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. After dessert, when coats were pulled from hooks and goodbyes exchanged in awkward fragments, Mark clapped me on the shoulder. See you tomorrow. Boss, he said deliberately, loud enough for Richard to hear. Richard's glare followed me out the door, but it didn't land the way it used to. Not anymore. A turning tide over the next few months, Mark's commitment didn't waver. He learned fast, faster than I had at his age. He was running customer calls on his own, quoting jobs, even managing a couple of subcontractors for bigger projects. Clients liked him, trusted him. One afternoon, I walked into the shop to find Mark at the counter with a local hardware store manager, negotiating a deal for regular IT maintenance. He sounded confident, professional, nothing like the kid who'd stood shivering on the porch at Christmas. When the man left, Mark turned to me. That could be a steady contract, he said, almost casual. I just stared at him. You know you're becoming better at this than me, right? He laughed, shaking his head. Not a chance. I'm just learning from the best. Richard's silence. Richard stopped coming around. For months, he avoided Sunday dinners, claiming work obligations. When he did appear, he kept his comments short, his eyes on his plate. It was strange. The man who once filled every silence with his voice now left silences where his pride used to sit. I think he knew he'd lost something. Not just an argument, but the grip he had on his son. A year later, by the following Christmas, the shop wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We'd landed 3 more steady business contracts, doubled our customer base, and even hired a part-time tech to help with the growing workload. Mark was no longer just my cousin helping out. He was my partner. That Christmas Eve, when we all gathered again at Mom's, I noticed something different. Richard didn't make a joke at my expense. He didn't mention small jobs or real success. He sat quieter, more reserved, watching Mark laugh with cousins and swap stories about troubleshooting servers and setting up networks. At one point, Mark stood to refill his glass, and Richard caught my eye across the room. For a second, just a flicker. I thought I saw it. Respect. He didn't say it. He probably never would. But I saw it. And honestly, that was enough. The full circle. Later. That night, as snow fell soft against the windows, Mark and I stepped outside again, just like the year before. Funny, isn't it? He said, shoving his hands into his pockets. Last Christmas, I was asking you if you had work. Now look at us. Yeah, I said, smiling. Now look at us. The cold air stung, but it felt clean, fresh. For years, I'd been the punchline. At family gatherings, the target of cheap jokes about small jobs. But now, the truth stood taller than Richard's voice ever could. What I built mattered, and the proof was standing right beside me. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.